Frodobots is probably one of the more unique companies that we've had on the token warrant.
So in a way, when we showed up, it was literally a godsend, right? Because they finally get to test things in the real world. So even though we are a very small team, we don't have like a huge fleet, but we are in over 30 cities now. Sometime last year, we open sourced about 2,000 hours of real world Sidewalk robot data. And this turns out is already the largest dataset of its kind, certainly in the public domain.
We need to amplify the stories of things like Frodobots and other companies and networks that are building things that have potential value add to the ecosystem in terms of kind of real world use cases, but also use cases that are furthering technology development broadly.
And if we do this well, this will be something that truly moves the needle for solving overall embodied AI.
Hey everyone, Mike Zyke, I'm the host of the Token Warrant, and we're going to have a cool robot conversation today with Michael Cho, founder of Frodobots, and Lacey-Ann Wisdom from Protocol VC. Thanks guys for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, Mike.
Yeah, so Lacey, maybe it'd be helpful to start with you. I think you're the first guest from Protocol VC, and in crypto, there's a lot of ecosystem funds. I think most ecosystems have fund where they invest out of it, they offer grants, but Protocol Labs ecosystem fund is very different from, I think, a lot of other ones in its approach and sort of its mandate. So maybe to kind of kick things off, it'd be helpful to understand how Protocol VC fits into Protocol Labs, and then maybe how it functions uniquely versus some of the other ecosystem funds that exist out there.
Okay, totally. So I can give you kind of the history of Protocol VC and then a little bit more background on Protocol Labs as well. So Protocol Labs was basically founded as an innovation network in 2014. It today stands at around 600 companies that are active participants in the network, and these companies are building different tools and technologies around blockchain, AI, and many other kind of segments. We have started investing, we started investing in 2017 from Protocol Labs. And so when we initially started investing, it was never necessarily an ecosystem fund. So one of our earliest investments was actually Starkware in 2018. We also helped incubate the first version of CoinList in 2018. And that's now become a unicorn business. Neither of those companies necessarily have anything to do with the tools and infrastructure that Protocol Labs have created. But I would say that those tools, two of which are essentially public goods, have driven a lot of founders to our network. And so I do want to highlight, Protocol Labs created IPFS, and which is now used by, I think, over 100 million users, and it's kind of the backbone of companies like OpenSea and used by companies like MetaMask. And then we also created Liquidity, which is this protocol that is powering so many blockchain networks today. If you look at all the blockchain networks that are actually using Liquidity, the market cap is well over 400 billion and includes Ethereum and many other EVM chains as well too. So that's a little bit of context on Protocol Labs. As I mentioned, we started investing in 2017. In 2024, Protocol VC kind of officially spun out our fund. So we're now a standalone kind of GP-LP fund, very separate from Protocol Labs, but still Protocol Labs is an investor in us. And so this was partially to kind of rectify this idea that I think a lot of people have always had of us being an ecosystem fund. But if you look at our portfolio broadly, it's never been ecosystem specific. So I hope that gives a little bit more detail there.
Yeah, it definitely does. I think, the biggest thing is that, most ecosystem funds, in my experience, really all the capital comes from the ecosystem, whether that's, tokens they've sold or money they've raised for the treasury. Whereas, for you guys, it really functions more like a traditional venture fund with LPs, and one of those LPs being Protocol Labs. I definitely should not have forgotten the CoinList connection, given I frequently mention the collaboration of AngelList and Protocol Labs to create CoinList. And I think you also have a really unique background. I was taking a look at your LinkedIn, and prior to getting into venture, it seemed like you were more on the allocator side at Andrew W. Mellon, working across a few different asset classes at private equity, private credit. I'd be curious, like within the allocator space, if you kind of put that hat back on for a moment, how do you think they're thinking about crypto as an asset class? And if they should allocate funds towards crypto venture versus all the other myriad of other choices that they have available to them? Like, what do you think is being discussed, behind closed doors? If you could, kind of go back in time from when you were still there.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting discussion. So in 2018, I kind of had a really strong thesis around, and this is when I was still an allocator, I had a really strong thesis around investing in Bitcoin as a play, kind of pitching Bitcoin as a real asset in the allocator community. Is something that we explored. I think it's something that many allocators are just now starting to actually explore investing in at the institutional level. And I think part of that is that these allocators tend to move a little bit more in a reserve fashion because, oftentimes if you're working from a foundation or endowment standpoint, you have to make sure that your investments are aligned with the mission of the foundation or the endowment. And you also have a certain lower risk appetite in some cases. So if you even look at venture as a whole, venture really didn't enter a lot of large allocators' portfolios for a long time. There are several allocators, especially among like larger endowments, that missed the venture wave altogether in like kind of the early days because they thought it was too risky of an asset class. And when you look at crypto's risk profile, it's still extremely risky to them. And a lot of them don't have the facilities to actually custody things like in-kind distributions, which is something that I spoke a lot about at Mellon back when I was there as well. And so talking to a friend who's working at BlackRock on the kind of Bitcoin ETFs and Ethereum ETFs, he's kind of echoed that this is something that like allocators are still figuring out, like how to custody these solutions. They're now more interested in a lot of the like public crypto investments because they've seen the returns that those have driven. But they're not necessarily the type of people that are going to just ape into something, right? And so even if you look at me pitching Bitcoin as a $150 million investment in 2018, it would have performed really well. But, a lot of these allocators at the foundation or endowment level have so much funding that it's really about what's going to move the needle on like an $8 billion to $10 billion portfolio. And they're just thinking at a very different scale. And they also have just unlimited access to so many different opportunities all around alternatives. At the same time that I was looking at potentially investing into Bitcoin, I was also looking at investing into farmland, right? Which has a very different return profile than crypto.
Yeah, definitely hadn't heard farmland as something that we're competing with in terms of the investment dollars that we're all collectively going after.
And I think that's something that most, VCs and like crypto investors aren't thinking about. But when you go into a room with an allocator, they might be looking at a farmland portfolio. They might be looking at a portfolio of real estate logistics that are like last mile facilities in a very consolidated area. They have massive kind of scope of things that they need to look at to meet their return targets, which are often very low. And they're not necessarily motivated by like an absolute return profile, but more on just maintaining something that has a very low Sharpe ratio.
And what do you think as fund managers, beyond that, understanding them a little bit better, like what do you think we collectively as an industry could be doing better to kind of communicate, educate on the things that we're investing in now, like Frodobots?
Yeah, I think we need to amplify the stories of things like Frodobots and other companies and networks that are building things that have potential value add to the ecosystem in terms of kind of real world use cases, but also use cases that are furthering technology development broadly. I think a lot of times what reaches allocators' ears are more the like casino concepts of crypto. And so like there's a lot of talk about, meme coins or like what's happening with pumped out fun, even if they don't necessarily know what pumped out fun is. And so I think if people want to attract capital from these larger institutions, we need to also kind of present in a certain way that this is not just a DGen ecosystem, but it's also an ecosystem that is building things that can bring real change. And so I think that's part of why we're so excited about Frodobots and like other companies like it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Frodobots is probably one of the more unique companies that we've had on the token warrant. Michael, you're the only, as far as I know, apparently airplane crash survivor. What is that a euphemism, or what exactly happened there?
Yeah, so long story short, like I nearly died in a plane crash. Funny enough, that time I was actually, I guess, on the buy side. I was working at a kind of a family office. We were looking to invest in a Korean aircraft manufacturer. So as part of the due diligence, I went to check out the product, and obviously, the plane actually crashed into the sea with me inside it. The pilot died. I nearly died, like basically from drowning. I was basically drowning for like 10 to 15 seconds. And I'll say if I didn't get out in the last 1 or 2 seconds, I would have died. So it was that close. I was basically losing consciousness and all of that. And you know how they say when you're about to die, your whole life flashed before you? It was exactly like that. Like it was like that. Like even though it was only 10 to 15 seconds, it felt like hours, honestly. Anyway, so we it is a very small plane, by the way, right? There were 4 of us. The pilot died. I had the least injury, although I have a very long scar on my shoulder here. It's not. It's I would say 99% recovered. But yeah, the other 2 guys, one of them had really bad injury, would never really fully recover, and he was sitting right next to me, right? So I could have just been him, right? And anyway, yeah, so that was that.
This is a crazy story. I just saw it on your LinkedIn, airplane crash survivor, so I was curious to ask about it, but man, that is intense.
Yeah, honestly, looking back, in some way, it's also the best thing that have ever happened to me, right? The fact that I survived, because I'll say, back then I was an investment guy, making decent money, investing other people's money and all of that. But I think I wasn't truly, pursuing things I would love. And at the moment when you're about to die, like you realize all of that in those few seconds. And so yeah, that was my last like real corporate job, honestly, and that was like 10 years ago. So I've been doing startup ever since. I love technology, just wanted to build things. But it's been quite a journey. This is actually my 3rd startup. Never have any real commercial success, but I think I have a lot of battle scars along the way. I basically make all of the typical mistakes that you would expect a founder to make. I think I made all of them. But honestly, if not for that plane crash, I would not still be working on it because, obviously as an entrepreneur, sometimes it's really lonely. You get to a really dark place sometimes. But when I think back, like, hey, I nearly died once, right? So what can be worse than dying? And I thought, okay, I just need to survive another day. And it is very much the journey with Frodobots. When we first started 3 years ago, robotic is a very dirty word. Hardware is a very dirty word. Right? Robotic is the hardest of hardware, right? And so I'm very thankful, like me and a couple of us on the core team, there are a couple of times in our journey that we basically run out of money, honestly. And somehow we just don't pay ourselves and continue building. It was tough, but I'm glad we did those because, like, obviously the market has turned around. A lot of our initial thesis have I would say the whole world has had to recognize that in a way. So, and obviously we as a team, we want to really, move fast and seize those opportunities. And it's really awesome to meet other, people who believe in the journey, like Lacey. There's really a lot to build, but the opportunity is immense. Happy to talk more about it. But anyway, so that was my plane crash too.
Yeah, we'll have to have another episode where we unpack this plane crash, because that's or maybe at a crypto conference we'll sit down and have a deeper chat, because that's pretty intense. But yeah, turning a bit more to Frodobots and like the journey to get there, because I think if I recall, like your brother. Or someone you're related to, you guys are involved in the co-founding, but you were kind of like casually working on robots as hobbyists, but then stumbled upon this idea a little bit more deeply. Like what was the journey to founding?
Yeah, so I've so Sam, my second brother, is my co-founder. So right now he looks after the hardware team in Shenzhen, and he's been in China for the longest time. So during the pandemic, I'm in Singapore. Sam is in China, and then my youngest brother was in the Bay Area. And three of us are pretty geeky in our own ways, and we thought, hey, we don't know when we were going to ever meet again, so we should just geek out over something, so we have a reason to come together every weekend. And so that's all it is. So we just decided, okay, let's build a Sidewalk robot and try to make it drive by itself, that kind of thing, right? So yeah, we started messing around for about 6 months, and that actually gave us some pretty good idea of the bill of materials that what goes into a Sidewalk robot. And then I would say a couple of months in, I started to look around other, Sidewalk robot projects. Most of them are really well-funded startups or big companies. In fact, Amazon used to have a big program called Scout. And then I started to realize that most of them, their robots probably cost like, $10,000 or more. And it's almost like the cost of a used car. And they ended up being that cost because I think all of them try to do the AI thing from day one, which means usually what happens is that they have an expensive compute, that LiDAR, radar, fancy cameras and all that. And usually they are all going for last mile delivery as an application, which further, increase the requirement of the hardware robustness and all that. And then we started thinking, okay, maybe the path towards, or rather the bottleneck towards level 5 autonomy for Sidewalk, self-driving is not necessarily lack of hardware or just lack of algorithm. Because even back then, 3-4 years ago, you can roughly see in the literature like things like offline reinforcement learning really starting to work, some of these techniques, and maybe it's just lack of real world data. And so if you look at the whole problem as a lack of bottleneck by data, then you want to do the opposite, right? Because these robots are basically real world data collection devices. Having $10,000 devices just doesn't help you scale the data set. And so there's another thing that actually comes about if you have a $10,000 hardware. What ends up happening is that the business model that all of these startups or even Amazon, right, they have to do is because it's so costly, they ended up having to put those basically robots on their own balance sheet. And these are obviously depreciating assets. So their incentive is actually to make those hardware last as long as possible so they can amortize over, say, 5-6 years, which means they don't have an incentive to every year innovate on the hardware. Now, this is a very different model, let's say, compared to the DJIs of the world, right? Every year they put a gun to their head and say, okay, I need to clear the inventory from last year model. And if you look at that, right, that model just forces them to, iterate very, very quickly on hardware. So I think that's the other thing that is maybe not super obvious. But anyway, so we naively thought that maybe we can build a $500 robot. And the way to do it, we thought it's possible because we just make it a dumb robot, meaning no AI, just purely 100% remote tele operated. So in a way, instead of looking the problem as an AI problem from day one, we look at it as a networking problem from day one, right? How do we solve latency? But ultimately, we're still interested in solving the AI. It's just that we think let's solve getting the data first. And maybe by looking at solving the latency problem, we can actually get really cheap robots and therefore collect more data. So it kind of started off that way.
The initial stab, though, was people buying these robots as a game to drive them around towns, correct?
Yeah. So we honestly, the gaming thing, we also kind of lean into it a couple of months after. So it wasn't what we also thought that we're just going to do last mile delivery. I have driven our bot into a Starbucks at least 100 times, right? So these robots have microphones, and speakers. So we will order something, say on DoorDash, and select self pickup, and then I drive the robot into a Starbucks, and then hey, this is my order, and usually they'll get a shot. But I'll say 9 out of 10 times are successful. But I recognize that to solve the remaining 10%, you literally probably need to solve level 5, right? So which becomes very difficult. But while we were testing all of these, I realized something, right? Which is all of us in the core team started fighting with each other to control that robot because it's kind of fun to drive that robot. And then that's when we realized, okay, maybe this should just be a game. And I'll say fast forward to today, we have some, evidence that this really can, robotic gaming, these two words usually rarely come together. But I'm very, very bullish on it on a number level. Firstly, if you position the whole thing as a game, you drastically lower the expectation of what people expect from robots, right? I know it's pretty crazy, especially these 1-2 years. You see all sorts of crazy demos of robots doing, crazy shit. But my view, is that actually it's going to take some years before some of these robots truly is good enough to replace humans. In most settings that you imagine, if you want a humanoid to look after your elderly parents and whatnot, that is years away before these robots are even safe enough to be near my kids or my parents. And so what is that bridge, right? From now to then? Of course, all of us want to build towards that future. But one way to do it is just to structure it as a game, right? So in a game, if that robot failed, then it's just just a game. You fail the mission, no matter. And I think, and then the other thing is, if you turn it around to make it a fun gaming experience, the unique economics suddenly change, right? I would say most robotics company, they actually hire what they call teleoperators, basically human beings to control those robots and then collect data that way. So on the P&L, there's an expense item. In our case, the teleoperators are our customers. They are our users. Some of them actually pay us hundreds of US dollars for the privilege of driving robots around. I would say that it's a very, I would say ultimately it's still a small niche of gamers in the world who take this, kind of gameplay. But it's a very unique gameplay, right? So Mike, I don't know where you are right now, but let's say you're in New York, you can literally drive one of our Cyber robot right now in Africa. And it's like a Pokemon Go kind of experience / a little bit of Hunger Games. So you basically drive around the robot, pick up Solana NFTs, But honestly, like most gamers in our game don't even know that this is a crypto thing. They just think that it's funny, right?
That's usually what we're aiming for, is people not necessarily knowing it's crypto that they're interacting with. And there was a moment though, I think a couple of years ago, where the game went pretty viral. I don't know if that's when you guys showed up on the map for most crypto people, or how, because obviously you guys didn't start out, I think, with the crypto side.
Yeah, we didn't start out that way, but just on that round, so we did went viral. Actually, pretty number of times now on TikTok. So 5 million views or more on TikTok. And honestly, we are not great content creator, but somehow the content is, I think, it's interesting, right? I mean, you drive around a robot to do some stuff in the real world, and so because of that, the first time it happened, we were just completely unprepared. A ton of people started coming to control the robot. Obviously, we have no security features. We immediately have trolls, people trying to hack our system. And obviously, it's all closed off and all that by now. So it's way more safer. But even since then, we have number of TikTok videos, and all of those are actually have brought on all purely Web2 eyeballs. So if you go to our Discord today, I would say more than 90% of them are just Web2 gamers who doesn't know that the thing that they're collecting is even NFT. And then we have some Web3 gamers, and then we have some robotic researchers in the Discord. So it's a mix, but it's honestly mostly Web2 gamers. But anyway, going back to the crypto thing, so I would say also when we first started this project, I was very anti-crypto. I don't know, it was just me being very at the beginning. I mean, looking back, I think I was just not open-minded enough. But what changed my mind, or what made me took the red pill, was basically helium. And because at the time, our goal was to make a $500 robot, right? And then suddenly I found out about helium, and then there they were trying to sell $500 hotspots. And they ultimately they minted token out of thin air. They managed to crowdsource essentially, $500 million, or maybe even more amount of hardware capital. And even more impressively to me is that, if you look at the map, it's so geographically distributed. And this is exactly what we wanted as well, right? We wanted a $500 robot. Back then, we were still at a few $1,000s. Although at this point, we have $150 robot. So we are ready, I would say. But I really wanted the map, because the data that is useful to solve self-driving in Sidewalk environment, what you want is really diversity in the data set. So you want it to be collected in snow environment, in a hot summer in Abu Dhabi, or, in just different environments. And so that the AI can generalize a lot better. And so we thought that we should just learn from helium. I mean, back then there wasn't any even this term called DPN, right? I didn't know about Filecoin back then, so that was how naive I was. And so, yeah, we just, and I think 1 week after we found out about Helium, there was a Solana hackathon in Singapore. I have no idea what's L1 and Warrant. I just went there to learn something. So, but it all worked out quite well. I mean, we've been so-called like waiting on Solana for nearly like 2.5, 3 years now because of the hackathon. But right now I'm fully red pill on the deep side of things for sure. And maybe more recently, I started to think that there's something to meme coin as well, perhaps. But for sure, all the deep things I 100% believe in. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely been inspirational, Helium, that project, for so many founders across so many different sectors that have come into the space just after seeing what they were able to achieve. Lacey, going back, and did you see this on TikTok? Like, how did Protocol Labs initially find out about Frodobots? I think you guys might have gotten involved in the very early days, even from like a build out perspective. But what was the genesis of you all coming together?
Yeah, so I actually kind of saw Frodobots like pop up on my radar, probably earlier than when we actually ended up investing. I thought it was like an interesting kind of go-to-market. Really liked the gamification aspects with kind of just deploying this like Sidewalk robot. But honestly, like wasn't 100% convinced with that kind of being the whole business at that point. And it really wasn't until I met with Michael in 2024 in Singapore, and he kind of talked through like the broader, longer term vision for Frodobots, that I was like, this is actually really interesting. Like, this is actually going to unlock a huge amount of data for robotics. And it had kind of, I think at that point, we'd also had a little bit more time to kind of map the robotics landscape and talk to a lot of, other companies at the intersection of crypto and robotics. And I just felt like after meeting Michael that he was probably the founder with the most kind of grit and possibly also the most just like deep-seated interest in the space to really take this to the next level. And so after meeting him, we introduced him to kind of the venture studio on our side of things, and then they got to work building out the idea for BitRobot. So this BitTensor-like subnet of subnets focused on scaling robotic data collection, essentially.
And was that, Michael, was that the initial funding that you guys just announced the fundraising round about a week ago, or you guys had previously raised maybe a seed round or a pre-seed prior to that? Like, what's the fundraising journey been for the company?
Yeah, so prior to this latest round, we raised like something like 2 million. And again, I want to say this is at an age where no one wanted to touch robotics, so really kudos to those who took a chance on us. But yeah, I would say if you ask me the first 2 years of our journey, like what was our vision? It was basically to use crypto incentive to get crowdsourced big data sets meant for Sidewalk. Like, they call it basically urban robotic navigation. So that's a specific thing under robotic research. But then, I would say in the last especially in the last year, we really actually started working very closely with a bunch of robotic researchers, especially I would say some folks from DeepMind. We're pretty close to them now, and also we now have like a lot of different research collab with different universities like UC Berkeley, Stanford, National University of Singapore. And the reason why we got to talk to them and kind of work with them pretty closely is because we started showing up with some data, and basically started off having this Sidewalk robot data. Just to give you a sense, sometime last year we open sourced about 2,000 hours of real-world Sidewalk robot data, and this turns out is already the largest data set of its kind, certainly in the public domain. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but it is already the largest, and that's because basically this type of robotic data, they call it teleoperation data, actually doesn't exist naturally. It's you have to really set it up in a way, because it's not just video. Most people just think of it as collecting video from the cameras of the robot. Actually, that is important and necessary, but it's not like the end all and be all. Actually, what you really want is what we call action labels. So what we're doing is actually we're collecting what the human gamers are doing. And we're collecting them at about 20 to 30 hertz. And then when you match that timestamp that against like the video, which is also around 30 frames per second, that's how you actually start to use like this algorithm to actually in a way train the AI to learn from human. And so this is kind of what Tesla is doing, right? Tesla obviously has the video, but actually more importantly, they record what the human drivers are doing. So because we structure it as a game, we obviously know what the gamer is doing, and we have this data set. And we started, reaching out to researchers, and honestly, the feedback was way better than even we expected. I didn't know that, even at that scale, all of them will like. So I would say, but along the way, so last year actually, we co-organized with the DeepMind folks this competition called Earth Rover Challenge. So it's basically an AI versus human competition, where on the human side, we actually partner with YGG, UQ Games. So we have a bunch of gamers playing the games, and then we send basically the top 6 or 7 human gamers to represent humanity to Abu Dhabi at a robotic conference there. And then on the other side, we have like robotic teams from, University of Texas, Austin, Seoul National Universities and whatnot. And these are all robotic navigation research labs, some of the best ones. And they basically take on the same game or same missions as a human, and then just battle it out in the real world. And also, this is the first time it's ever been done, actually, something like that in a robotic conference, because usually all the competition is either done in a very lab and controlled environment or done in simulation. This is truly the first one where, even though the competition is in Abu Dhabi, because the robotic conference is in Abu Dhabi, but actually all the actions are in 8 different cities, right? We have robots in Africa, in South America, and all that. So anyway, the humans are way better, by the way, just FYI. So we're good on that front. Like the AI is pretty bad as of now. But what I learned in that whole process is that actually, firstly, the researchers care a lot about the data that we have, right? So that's number one. But it turns out at the level that we're giving them, the data of level we're giving them, they already actually need non-trivial compute to do that work. So just to give you a rough sense, right? They ended up needing actually 1 box of H100. So 1 box is 8 H100, right? To take advantage of this data set. And the training run will last about at least 7 days. So, and if you talk to the, folks in academia, well, you realize actually most universities don't even have, 1 H100 or a couple H100, much less than H100. So when we gave them the data, they say, oh, this is great, but can you also give me compute? So I don't have to compute, right? So what we did was, and also kudos to some of our partners. So we actually got 2 boxes of H100, right? 1 box from Exabit, 1 box from IONET. And we turn around and give to the researchers. Okay, now you have to compute and you have the data, do your work. And so, this is awesome. So they finally managed to do whatever research they do. In fact, there's a couple of papers that are coming out that's really take advantage of both the data and compute. So in the next 1-2 weeks, it should be out already. But what I realized even more, beyond the data and beyond the compute, what they actually really, really needed was real-world evaluation. And I'll give you a concrete example. So one of these team, they're probably one of the top team doing self-driving in their country. And they told me that before meeting us, in the last 2 years, or rather the last time they tested their self-driving algorithm in the real world was more than 2 years ago. So I asked them, hey, what do you do for 2 years? Apparently, in the last 2 years, all they did was in simulation. So in a way, when we showed up, it was literally a godsend, right? Because they finally get to test things in the real world. So even though we are a very small team, we don't have like a huge fleet, but we are in over 30 cities now, our robots. And so that allows them basically a real world environment to immediately test how good or how bad is the model. And that is something that is very unique about robotics that is very different from, say, I'll say robotics AI versus digital AI, right? If you think about digital AI, typically you only need 3 things, right? You need data, you need compute, and you need like advancement in algorithm, which means your talent. And so let's say if DeepSeek or OpenAI were to open source a new, or like drop a new model, typically what you find is within 1 day on Twitter, everyone who knows what to evaluate a model on will already have a very good judgment of how good or how bad is the latest model. You only need 1 day at most, right? So the 5-check is very quick. Now, obviously, there's no perfect benchmarks. That's why usually there's 20 to 30 benchmarks that all these LLMs and all this model will publish. But what you realize is that the final step of benchmarking or evaluation is never a bottleneck towards the iteration cycle or iteration speed. Now, robotics is completely different because the only test you can have to know whether you build a decent model is in the real world. And that you just can't cut short, right? And in fact, just to give you an analogy using Tesla again, let's say if Tesla released FSD14, and let's say within 1 day they've gathered 1 million miles, and no crashes, no disengagement, so no real world failures. The question is, does Tesla, or in fact anyone in the world, know whether they've actually built a level 5 model or level 2? Honestly, no one knows, because what if in the next mile there's a crash? So what you realize is that actually in the real physical world, the only verifiable fact is when some shit happens in the real world, basically real world failures. And so the only way for you to tell whether it's a good model is you got to wait for things to fail. So that is a very paradoxical thing that I started to realize over time as we work with these researchers. But that is really a big bottleneck, maybe even more so than the lack of data, right? And so, but anyway, so I started to realize, hey, actually it's not just about purely gathering real world data. And I would say, in fact, like synthetic data and video data are things that we in BitRobot will also start to do as well. Those are also useful, but they have their own different trade-off, right? As well. But you also need a physical fleet of robots to test things in the real world. And then we started to realize what we're doing for Sidewalk robot, like all these ideas that we have using crypto incentives to do this, actually can be applied to many different robotic embodiments. Could be humanoid, could be drones, could be surgical robots. They all need their own data sets. They all need their own compute. They all ultimately need their own models. And so we think there's just maybe a much bigger thing to build here. And that's when we started thinking about it. And honestly, that's also roughly when I started to find out about BitTensor. And in a way, that's how I, ended up calling it BitRobot, like kind of paying tribute to BitTensor. Honestly, if you asked me a year ago whether something like BitRobot can happen, I would say no. But right now we're on a timeline where things like Helium exists, Falcon exists, and BitTensor exists. And so to me, it's natural for there to be a project in crypto where it's a network of subnets, idea where each subnet is trying to tackle different parts of the stack, right, on the path to solving embodied AI. And if we do this well, this will be, something that truly moves the needle for solving overall embodied AI.
Yeah, something that's really cool that you guys have done is also the interoperability with other unexpected places within crypto. So leveraging YGG, relying on decentralized compute. Like, it's cool to see you building out with the tools and resources that are available within crypto. Something that you did was really cool, which is publish your reasons that Frodobots or BitRobot might fail when you announce the fundraise. So maybe going back to you, Lacey, usually when we write out our investment memo, we also will write reasons why this might fail or reasons this is not going to work. So for you, like when you guys decided to invest, what were the things that, were they similar to what Michael said in terms of reasons they might fail, or how did you guys think about, okay, these are some risk factors for bringing BitRobot to market and making it be successful?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I do want to highlight, when we did invest, the idea for BitRobot wasn't fully formulated yet. It was something that was still kind of in the ideation phase. So I would say that we were definitely evaluating reasons, Frodobots might fail, and like this longer kind of vague vision at that time might fail too. And so what we looked at a lot was the competitive landscape in crypto and then the competitive landscape in Web3. I think in crypto, we were pretty confident that Michael was the founder that we wanted to back. But looking at the Web2 landscape, it's characterized by these massive competitors who have raised significant war chests of capital. And so we kind of thought to ourselves, like, why does Frodobots have an edge against all of these competitors? And it honestly came down to just, they're going to have an edge because they're using this decentralized model that is much more scalable, is going to lend itself to more diversity in terms of the data that they collect, and is also going to kind of remove a lot of the barriers for actually like collecting that real world data and kind of bridging that unconscious to conscious data collection gap as well. So that was one thing that we looked at. We also kind of were trying to understand some of the hardware risks innate to it. I think we got comfortable with the fact that while there is some hardware risk, I think, Michael's already mentioned that he's working with the University of Seoul, UC Berkeley, lots of top tier institutions that have these huge faculties that are kind of focused on robotics data, but don't necessarily have like the areas to even, or the technologies to actually simulate these results with actual real world like robots. And so we kind of said, hey, he's already found a niche of people that are willing to use this product. And as he kind of decides to go up market into like robotics companies, those in some ways could also be beneficiaries and like end users of the data as well. So we kind of got comfortable around the hardware risk there too. And then I'd say, another risk we kind of had for BitRobot specifically is like, would he be able to just make the partnerships to like get people to share this robotic data that already exists in the world, like the video data that exists, the like synthetic data that exists, like how would he kind of onboard this? And I will say that that's a fear that was shut down, I think, pretty quickly, because I think we'd barely kind of wired the money, and Michael was already coming to us talking about all these partnerships that he was kind of already working on and had in the pipeline. And so that's definitely one that could still, be a risk longer term, but I think that it has been significantly de-risked already.
Yeah, Mike. So just to double take on what Lacey and also kind of what you mentioned, Mike, just now about like partnership with the IONET guys, the Exabits, and the YGG. So we'll have quite a number of like partnership announcements in the coming weeks and months with other DeepIn projects. So I definitely see that because the way we structure the tokenomics as a network subnet, it just gives us a lot of freedom to actually more form like basically partnership, right, with other DeepIn projects that have adjacent resources that could be very useful, in the path of solving robotics AI. And I think this whole composability, among different DeepIn projects is a very interesting one. And especially, talking to other DeepIn founders, and we all already think the same wavelength. So, a lot of the partnership are actually very easy to, in a way, like, it's quite easy to start the discussion. And all of us actually, when I say us, meaning, other DeepIn projects with us, we all want to push the envelope and we all, in a way, wanted to show the world that, using crypto incentives, you can really move the needle in the real world. And maybe just one very specific thing about robotics as a field, right? Compared to maybe other DeepIn projects. So if you look at, let's say, Helium or HiveMapper, these kind of DeepIn projects, fantastic DeepIn projects, but they all try to basically typically take mind share or market share away from some big incumbents. For robotics, I would say, except Tesla, obviously in self-driving, on the road, if you're talking about humanoid, if you're talking about, even sidewalk robots and all that, I would say Web3, even for us, right, compared to Web2 entities, they are like, we are all kind of at the starting line, in my view, right, in this grand scheme of things. Even for Tesla, with the Optimus, they are still hiring maybe about 100, I'm guessing around that range, of people to go to their Palo Alto office to teleoperate so that they can gather the data. Right. The data flywheel doesn't exist or humanoid yet. So, while it's true that, there are really a lot of funding going into Web2 robotic companies, they're in the, hundreds of millions. But I would say, if you look at projects like Tensor and again, like, all these other DeepIn projects, you're talking about FDV of billions. So I think if we do the tokenomics well, like the capital formation can be faster and hopefully more evenly and globally distributed, that it's just very hard for a centralized entity to build. But at the same time, I also think that robotic is such a big, potential. Like, I don't necessarily think of like the Web2 counterparts as competitors. I think the role of partnership is way more than actually direct competition. Actually, certainly to the near and medium term. So I think there will be just a lot of partnership opportunity with our DPN counterparts, or like maybe we work to robotic companies. So we've got a bunch of things that hopefully we should be announcing in the coming weeks and months. That also give people some ideas of what could be the eventual subnets that could actually happen when we BitRobot officially like TGE and all that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of exciting things coming. And then I think just broadly speaking, the robotic space, you're right, it's totally caught fire recently. Meta announced, some of their ambitions on the humanoid side, obviously Tesla, and a ton of funding that is flowing into Web2 companies that are trying to build the robots that are going to clean our houses and do whatever else. Maybe just because, kind of wrap things up, you've talked a little about some partnerships that are coming, but like, because this podcast will be coming out in a couple of weeks, any like products that you're particularly excited about that you want to talk about, like, hey, this is what people should be getting involved with, anything that's kind of easier for the average crypto person to participate with?
Yeah, so great that you mentioned. So I think probably by the time this podcast drop, we will have announced this already. So we are actually launching this thing called Robots.fun, which is basically a launch pad for embodied AI agents. And this is a partnership with Virtuos. So obviously Virtuos is kind of one of the leaders in terms of like embodied AI agents with the meme coin. And so we just basically work with them and do a robotic, spin on it. But it's going to be a really fun thing, So because firstly we have really cheap robots now. So our Sidewalk robot, sorry I didn't bring it here. I wanted to show you, but it's $150 like a toy, right? So the hardware itself is already very cheap, and then we are actually today already have this embodied AI agent called Sam, which is live streaming 24/7. So it's on Twitter. It's the Twitter handle is Sam is moving, and so you dial into it. You will see a live stream of this AI that's driving some random robots in some random city, and the AI is just been basically told to explore the world, basically without crashing into things, and it's been doing for a couple, I think 2 months now. So it's pretty crazy. But what is even more crazy is that actually the AI model behind it is purely prompted with English. So our idea actually for Robots.fun is really to demystify this whole thing about robotics AI. It should be, our goal with that is it should be really allowing even like my 10-year-old kid, right, to get this robot, $150 toy. He can use English to prompt it and then experiment with how this robot actually do. So you basically clone Sam, right, as a base. It's actually quite hard to start from scratch because when I say the English prompt is about 5 pages it's almost like a mini essay of instructions. But once you have that base, you can start tweaking quite easily. You can literally say, hey, when you see a dog, like, run away from, like, turn away from the dog, and the AI will kind of do it. And so, and then of course, people can easily put a meme coin, right? And the whole thing is done on Virtual's rails. But the most fun part is actually on a daily basis, we'll have this kind of like, we call it ET Bounty Hunter game, almost like a real world Hunger Games, where anyone with these robots at the fixed time, every day, they put the robots out there. They can get the AI to catch like aliens, which are Solana NFTs. So it's like AI driving around in the real world, and you're competing worldwide. So it's really crazy. And of course, with the meme coin, right? And every day, we'll use some money, $1,000 or so to buy the meme coin of the winning AI agent. So obviously, you can imagine the better the AI, the better, the meme coin. And so now, it sounds very far-fetched from like, the BitRobot thing. I just want to make it very clear. BitRobot is definitely our North Star, right? But I would say, like, in a way, I feel that maybe in crypto there's two extremes, right? There's the DPN thing is very, very heavy, takes years to build, both supply and demand. And you really want to be serious about things, right? These are big capital that you're trying to deploy. You want to be very careful about tokenomics and things. In a way, it took us 3 years to think about the tokenomics before we landed on BitRobot, right? But on the other hand, you have all the degen energy, right? Very fickle-minded people. But then you can form a community really quickly. And so, in a way, that's how I see Robots.fun is in a way our go-to-market strategy to really bring mind share, get the degens, get the toy, the robotics enthusiasts, like, to start experimenting with things. And I think that is going to be really helpful for things that eventually will be very beneficial for BitRobot. So, and like I said, these robots are not ready to be used in real settings in production setting to replace human anytime soon. But in the meantime, they are pretty funny. You can get a viral TikTok video pretty easily. So we want to lean into that. Yeah,
it definitely does not hurt to have some fun along the way, even for the most serious humanoid experiments. Michael, Lacey, this is awesome to talk to you both. You guys have awesome backgrounds and a really cool story. So excited to share it with listeners. Anywhere people should stay up to date with you both. This is your time.
Yeah, so we're on Twitter, basically, Frodobots, and then we have a new handle, BitRobot Network. And I should say also, we are dropping the white paper. Maybe by the time this podcast go out, the white paper will be out. So obviously we'll have a lot of Twitter thread explaining what are the key concepts in the white paper. So that one is actually co-authored with Jonathan Victor and Juan Bennett and myself. And so watch out for that. And I'm on Twitter at Michael Cho, MICOOLCHO.
You can follow Protocol VC. It's just at Protocol VC on Twitter. And then you can follow me. I'm at Lacey_Wisdom. And I'll be posting a bunch about BitRobot and everything that's coming out, as well as, our own musings about interesting things in the space.
Cool. Well, thank you both, and we'll see you soon.